There you go. Well, Katie, I want to say, first of all, thank you for taking the time to chat with us. We appreciate seeing all the great alumni, BSU alum and BSU Bear in many spaces as well. Again, my name is Gerald Tang. I am the Executive Director of Career Services and Internship Programs, and I have a privilege and honor to talk to Katie McCue today and sharing a bit and hearing a bit more about your experiences for sure. So, Katie, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
Absolutely. So why don't we start by just, having you share a bit more about your experiences. I'm curious, what was your major and perhaps, how did you sort of navigate your way to your current role at MMA?
Sure, I'd be glad to answer that. So I was a political science major with a focus on American government and a minor in public relations. I have loved government and politics and public policy for as long as I can remember. Started out with political conversations around the dinner table at home. And that was really fostered for me in my Intro to American Government class at Bridgewater State University 21 years ago. It really was what solidified for me my love for government. And I know we'll talk more about this later in the conversation, but a number of experiences at Bridgewater led me to follow that career path into public policy. Should I share a bit more about that now?
Yeah, maybe perhaps for students who may not be familiar with what MMA does, can you share a bit more about what your missions, perhaps a bit more about your organizations, and how that tie to the public policy government sector, perhaps?
Absolutely, yeah, I'd be glad to. So let me start with where I started my career and then how I landed here, and I'll talk about what the Massachusetts Municipal Association does. So I moved to Washington, D.C. as a 22-year-old right out of undergrad to go to graduate school. I got a master's in political management from George Washington University, started working at an education nonprofit in Washington, D.C., and then several years later moved back to the greater Boston area and worked at an education nonprofit here, advocating for public funding and policies for public schools in Massachusetts. We have some of the best public schools in the country, arguably in the world here in Massachusetts, but we still have a lot of discrepancies amongst communities here in Massachusetts. So really working on that equity piece around public schools here in the Commonwealth. And that's how I got to know some of my future colleagues at the Massachusetts Municipal Association. So I have been here for 13 years. The Massachusetts Municipal Association is the professional membership association for the cities and towns in Massachusetts. We are one of 49 state municipal associations in the country. Every state except for Hawaii has one. My favorite joke is that I'll go there and start one if they're looking for someone. But because of their municipal structure, they don't have a municipal association. But all of the other states in the country have a professional membership association for the cities and towns in their state. So we represent all 351 cities and towns in Massachusetts. We work with the folks who manage those communities. So that's town managers and administrators, mayors, select boards, city councils, finance committee members, human resources directors, you name it, all the folks who manage communities. And we provide advocacy and lobbying services and professional development and training to support the cities and towns in Massachusetts. We work to make them more effective and efficient here in the Commonwealth.
That's awesome. Katie, love to kind of dive into a little bit more. 300, correct me if I'm wrong, 351 city and towns and that you are associated with in Massachusetts.
Correct.
Curious, how do you sort of balance the different needs within the city and town with such a large membership? And certainly there's many issues that individual might feel that is unique to them, but I'm curious about from the association point of view, how do you sort of juggle what is priorities and what is not priority to kind of advocate up to the larger, audience that might need those attentions?
Yeah, Gerald, that is such a good question. That's one of my favorite questions to answer. So I started here as a lobbyist. I was a senior legislative analyst for my first 5 years here, and then moved into administration and have served as our deputy executive director role for quite some time now. So I would say there's two pieces to that. One is there are many differences across the 351 cities and towns in Massachusetts. We only have actually a couple large urban centers in Massachusetts. The rest of our state is pretty suburban or rural. In fact, over half of those communities in Massachusetts have under 10,000 people. So we're actually a state of a lot of small sort of individual fiefdoms. So there's a couple things. First, we have guiding principles. So I would say we have two really overarching guiding principles that whether you're Boston or you're Munson sort of apply. One is that we need a fair share of revenue from the state in order to operate, right? So we need the state to provide fair tax revenue and revenue sharing with cities and towns in order to make it so they can operate. And the other one is management authority. So we want to make sure that the state, the federal government, the state government aren't putting mandates on cities and towns that are not they're not able to implement without resources, right? So it's those resources and that control. Then more sort of granularly, we have policy committees made up of our members, and we have a board of directors that help guide us on particular pieces of policy. So we look at our overarching guiding principles, and then we have actual members who sit with us as staff. We're a staff of 75 people in different areas of our organization, and help guide the work that we do.
That's awesome. And you previewed to it already. I'd love to kind of go back to a bit about you. And thank you for providing the overview of MMA, obviously the core mission and functions here. How did you sort of start your career from BSU to become a lobbyist and then go into the role that you're doing right now? Can you share a bit more about your insight? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So as mentioned, I was working for an organization. We were doing advocacy around public education, funding and reforms here in Massachusetts, and found out that the advocacy team here at the MMA was doing some similar work. So advocating around some reforms. This was over a decade ago, but some reforms in state government that would make that revenue easier on the local level to help fund schools. In most communities in Massachusetts, about 80% of their budget is school funding. I mean, it's huge. We prioritize public education really high here in Massachusetts. So it's a big part of municipal budgets. So I got to know some colleagues here. I'd been at that other organization for going on 5 years and was ready to try something different. And so I accepted a position here at the MMA doing advocacy around our labor management portfolio. So I did a really deep dive into benefits for public employees and our pension system here in Massachusetts, and worked with our friends across the aisle, so to speak, in the public sector labor unions to really make sure that we were passing legislation that made sense both for public employees and also for the taxpayers in cities and towns in Massachusetts. I did that work here for going on 5 years, and then our director of administration, in operations, was moving on, actually going to work in local government, and this position became available. And I took a big leap of faith, and I've been in this role for 8 years and now serve as our deputy executive director.
That's awesome. Congratulations. Obviously,
Thank you.
Appreciate your continued work as well. So some people think about the term advocacy may interpret in different ways. So I would love to kind of hear about what is the role of you originally as a lobbyist, and what does advocacy means to you and the work that you do, either on a daily. What is the daily typical work life potentially for someone in your space?
Sure. Yeah, I can talk. I'll talk about the advocacy space and what that work looks like, and then I'm happy to share what I do now in my role as our deputy. So I love this question because I think when people hear lobbyist, they think it's a dirty word, right? And they associate lobbyist with the tobacco industry or big oil. And I will not. I'm not going to bash those industries, but I think that's what comes to mind for people, right? Every single interest out there has an interest group. Everything out there. And so from my perspective, being an advocate for cities and towns is a really positive thing. It means that what that looks like at a really specific level to your question, we have a team of 6 people. They work on all different areas of policy, from fiscal policy for cities and towns to housing and zoning policy, which I know we'll talk about this. That's a huge issue right now here in Massachusetts, to siting of marijuana facilities, to DEP regulations that are coming down, right? Making sure that cities and towns are complying with environmental regulations, just a whole host of issues. And what they do is they serve as the voice of local government on Beacon Hill. So in Massachusetts, 2, maybe 3 communities have intergovernmental relations folks on staff. So certainly Boston has a team, Springfield and Worcester a little bit. Other than that, there's no other community in Massachusetts who really have dedicated intergovernmental relations folks who are paying attention to the hundreds and hundreds of pieces of legislation or regulations that Beacon Hill is pushing down to cities and towns. And so we provide that perspective up on Beacon Hill. I'll give a really clear example because I think this is a nice example, and it also ties into your previous question about what to do when communities don't agree. So legalized gaming. When casinos were coming to Massachusetts, that was a huge issue. And our members were really torn sort of ideologically about how they felt about casinos here in Massachusetts. So what we said as an organization is we're not going to take a position, we're not going to take a moral position on should or should we not have gaming in Massachusetts. But what we're going to say is if gaming is coming to Massachusetts, here are all the things we want to put in place to protect communities. So first of all, we want to protect the lottery because the lottery is the biggest source of funding for local government here in Massachusetts. That money is what funds the unrestricted general government aid accounts here in Massachusetts. So, scratch tickets and all the, all those sorts of things. We want to protect that money. We want to make sure that if a casino is going into a community, there's appropriate public safety around those casinos. We want to make sure the state isn't just saying, okay, you're going to build a casino. They're going to help fund those extra police officers that are needed, right? So we spent years making sure that the folks on Beacon Hill understood not pro or con legalized gaming, but if gaming is coming, and it did, we want it to be as successful as possible for communities. So that's like a real tangible example of what we do on the advocacy side.
That's awesome. A question popped up in my head. I'm just wondering, for my students who are looking at, career pathway and experiences, what is different between working with MMA different than city and, town government? Can you share a bit more about what the differences are, perhaps?
Sure. Yeah. So MMA, we are a private nonprofit organization. So we're not the public sector. We support our public sector members. So we support local government, but we are actually a private nonprofit association. So if nonprofit work is interesting to you, then, we would, MMA is in that world. We are a membership organization, a nonprofit. We are an advocacy association. Working in local government is public sector, I would say at its most basic level. And Gerald, when we were preparing for this together, one of the questions you had me think about is sort of why local government, right, as compared to state government or federal government. I started my career in DC. Right. I interned on Capitol Hill. I was in the Capitol building on September 11th, 2001, which really shaped so much of my sort of perspective. I was one of a handful of BSU students who was there on an internship, and no one could find us because cell phones were down that day. And that's a whole other story I could tell. But I really thought I was going to stay in DC and work in the federal government forever. And I'm still a junkie and listen to all the podcasts and watch way too much cable news. But what I think I have found is impacting people's lives starts at the local level, right? It starts with the potholes being filled and the streets being plowed and the kids being taught and all of those things that happen at the local level. One of the questions I was thinking about when we were preparing for this is, I think there's a lot of jobs in local government that people know about that are really obvious. Police officers, firefighters, teachers, right? Like, about those. But there's lots of jobs in local government that I think people don't even think about. So if you're a finance major, right, you can work in finance in local government. Recreation, social work, communities hire social workers. Communications, this is a budding field in local government. There's more and more communities that are hiring for chief information officers, right? People who are out there, or spokespeople, or social media, right? Cities and towns are like, ooh, we got to do social media. We don't know how to do social media. They're hiring young people to do social media. So there's actually like lots of really interesting opportunities where you can make a difference in your local community, have a good work-life balance, have really good benefits. Happy to talk about that. And do things that you could also do potentially in the private sector too. So it's beyond sort of the big, I would say, jobs that we all think about.
That's awesome. Katie, this is maybe a quite personal question for you. Looking back at your own self, who are Katie, so students at Bridgewater State University, what sparked your interest to consider a career in, the government sectors related sort of experiences that sort of motivate you to even considering, public sector is a career option that you want to pursue?
Yeah. I think it's always sort of been in me. I've just always, I was, I started off at Bridgewater. I thought I was going to go into sociology. I've just always been really interested in people. I'm a kind of helper by nature. It's who I am. And so I've always wanted to work in like the nonprofit and public policy sector. And then truly this Intro to American Government class I took my freshman year just like blew my mind. And I just fell in love and became a total junkie. I think lots of friends of mine, so if you love this stuff, right, and you love government, you love politics, you can go in different directions. I had a lot of friends that went like the campaign route, started working on political campaigns. That was never my forte. I didn't like asking for money and knocking on people's doors. And so I always, really geared toward the public policy side of things. I truly believe that the government is a good word. I do not believe that the government is a dirty word. I think government is here to help people. It's here to make people's lives better. I mean, I truly believe that. And I think there's no better example of that than what happens at the local level in our schools and in our police and fire stations and in our Department of Public Works and all of those places. So the interest was sparked early. I did a number of internships that helped really solidify that interest for me. And I've had a lot of great opportunities along the way.
That's great. And if you're looking back from your experiences, perhaps maybe a class, a conversations, or even an experience that you mentioned about internship experience that kind of sparked like, this is it. This is like reasons why I want to be in this career pathway. What would that be? What maybe a class or experience that you will say this really hit home with me?
Yeah, I think the poli-sci department when I was there was fantastic. And so I took a number of courses, and George Serra was my mentor when I was at Bridgewater. And so I took a number of excellent courses. And then going to Washington, D.C. changed my whole trajectory. So I went with a group of students. We did the Washington Center for Internships. I moved into my apartment, which was across the street from the Pentagon, 12 days before 9/11. And so it was life-changing. I was in the Capitol. I had to run. We couldn't get back to our apartment. We could watch the Pentagon burn from our balcony. I was 20, and it was the most formative experience of my life. I think for my generation, it was formative in lots of different ways, but being there and being in DC when it happened, and my parents saying to me, we'll come get you because other kids left, right? Other interns left, but we don't feel like you're any safer in Boston than you are in Washington. And we think you should stick it out. And I'm so glad they did, because it changed everything for me. And it opened up both, let's say on a practical level, sort of an understanding of how Washington worked. I knew I wanted to go to graduate school there. I applied, I was accepted into George Washington University and American University. I chose this really fabulous, unique program at GW. It really, solidified for me to look for the helpers. So that would be my experience.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I guess I'll go into this question. In what way do you think that BSU education prepared you for your career at this point, I guess? Yeah.
I think it prepared me in all the ways. I mean, like I said, the poli-sci program, I'm sure it's just as fabulous now, if not better, was really formative for me, gave me all of the grounding that I feel like I needed to certainly go to GW and kind of compete at that level with students from colleges and universities all over the country and all over the world. And then the internship opportunities, I just can't say enough about that. And having mentors, like George Serra and like John, who encouraged us to, try different things and go different places. That was really formative.
That's awesome. Thank you. Switching gear a little bit, talk about what's going on in local government, right? Obviously, there's many nuances of issues that are happening. I'd love to kind of hear from you at your level. What are some of the hot topics that are being talked about in local government space? And how do you, I guess let's start there and then we can go into
Yeah.
detail of that.
Oh my goodness, there's so many. I don't know where to, I do know where to start. I'm going to start with three that I think are
Yep.
kind of really trending right now. And it's, I would say these are adjacent to the kind of perpetual stuff that local government deals with, around, you know, making sure we have enough revenue to support our communities and all those sorts of things. So I'm going to talk about three. The biggest one I would say by far are migrant shelters. So that is an issue that is, you know, sort of across the board impacting communities in very different ways, right? Communities that have access to highways and have access to hotels are getting impacted in different ways than other communities, but that is across the board probably the biggest issue that we're facing, and it is so real. And I'll, you know, share a story with you that a mayor shared with us not that long ago, who's in a community that has several hotels that are housing families, that said both he had a group of families come in, and the next day there were students at school speaking 9 different languages, none of which they had services prepared for. I mean, it is so real, the real time. And you could feel in him, like local government wants to do the right thing. We believe in that here in Massachusetts. I have not met a local official that does not want to support and help these families. The immediacy and the real-time decision-making that's happening is really unprecedented. So I'd say migrant shelters is just far and away kind of the biggest thing that many communities are grappling with right now. Another one is the cost of housing. Some of you may have seen the report that came out this week that said, in order for a family of 4 with 2 working adults and 2 children to live in Greater Boston, they have to make over $300,000 a year to afford housing. It is unsustainable, the cost of housing here in Massachusetts. The type of housing that's being built, the cost of it. I live in one of those very high cost communities. It is totally untenable, and we are losing young people by the droves. They are just leaving Massachusetts because it is not a sustainable place for people to live. So, you know, I'm sitting right now in Boston, and this is a top priority, I know, for Mayor Wu and her administration. But this is something that local government from, you know, here in Boston to the part of the state that I live in, you know, all the way out to the Berkshires is grappling with. And then the third one I would share is climate change. Every community that we talk to, and the MMA is actually hosting a series of webinars this entire year to start to tackle this, is grappling with climate change. So our communities here on the coast, again, all the way out to the Berkshires, the climate is changing. I mean, that is indisputable. My children don't believe me when I tell them that I used to have to trick or treat in a snowsuit because it was freezing by October 31st. And my kids have been in a t-shirt every single year, I think, that they have trick or treated. You know, they think of, you know, old crazy mom when I tell that story. But it's true, and it's having real impact on local government in terms of cost of energy, in terms of buildings. We have so many buildings here in Massachusetts that aren't equipped to have air conditioning on in June. My kids' elementary school, there's no air conditioning. It is still really hot in September when they go back to school. How do you retrofit those buildings? How do you prepare our coastal communities? How do they prepare for climate change? And it's so real, and local government is at the front line of that. So I'd say migrant shelters, you know, sort of availability and cost of housing, and climate change are 3 really big issues that cities and towns are grappling with.
Thank you for sharing that. And I will agree with you that these are certainly hot topics happening in local government and all the way up, right? Local government, city, state, and even going further to the federal part of the conversation. Curious from you, from Katie, from your perspective, if students want to pursue and explore, and I don't know what I want to do yet, I'm really interested in politics and government and governmental affair and all, even the 3 issues that you talked about. How would you suggest students to kind of start exploring? Because there's so many ways people can get into and be supportive of either these local issues or even national discussion. How do you suggest students to kind of start to explore? What could be option and to help them navigate where they can start?
I would say a couple things. One is start to just pay attention in where you live, right? So if you live in a town, you probably have annual town meeting coming up this spring, like go to it, right? And I never went as a young person, and then I lived in cities, and so I'm actually living right now in the first place I've lived that is a town form of government since I was a child, since I was, left home at 18. And so just like figuring out what that looks like, voting in local elections, like familiarizing yourself with who are the folks who are running your communities, volunteering for boards. If you look around at most local government boards, they are predominantly retired people. I sit on a board in my town, and I am the youngest person on that board, and I'm not that young. But most people who have full-time jobs and a young family like I do are not serving. And so like just becoming involved and engaged in your community is a really first, I would say a really easy, relatively easy. And if you're in a city, right, like going to a city council meeting or just taking advantage of those opportunities. We need more young people engaged in the process. And then I would say looking for those internship opportunities. We talk a lot here about the MMA, at the MMA, about how to connect people who are interested in like internships and fellowships in local government. It's happening kind of piecemeal right now. It's difficult. It's difficult for a whole variety of reasons. Sort of that funding piece, like who's paying for it. Most local governments are pretty small, and so people are wearing a whole bunch of different hats. So there's not a person who's like, okay, I'm going to think about bringing interns in, but it is happening. And so I would say those are two great ways to get involved.
Thank you. That reminds me, back in the day, one of my first involvement was actually city council in a very small way as a student representative of one of the school district. It's just like, I'm just going to go to that and end up being on the board and be able to kind of hear really interesting dialogue, even though I didn't contribute anything probably, but just even being there and hearing the issues happening, impacting that particular, county and state and city, that certainly is powerful. So thank you for sharing that. You talk about internship opportunity. Would you suggest them to kind of try out different types of government agencies or different level of governments as a way to kind of test out their experiences? If so, how would you suggest them to kind of test it out and explore those options?
Talk to you, right? And go to the career office, go to the internship office. So when I was at Bridgewater, I also did an internship at the New Bedford courthouse. For a while, I thought I was going to go work in I wanted to maybe be a social worker in the prison system or somehow kind of like connect with that world. And so I did this internship at the courthouse. There was a prison in the courthouse. I was exposed to that. I learned very quickly that that was not the path that I wanted to take, but I was exposed to it. And I had this internship, and it gave me that lens and that framework. So I would say just do as many things as you can, because again, it'll give you a foundation, and it'll also show you what you don't want to do, pretty quickly.
That's awesome. Yeah, and to confirm, right? Internship doesn't have to be always sunshine and rainbow. You might discover things you like and don't like, and that might be also a fantastic way to validate or reaffirm things that you thought that you want to do but no longer interested in, or things that you love to do but now I want to do more because I enjoy doing the work, right? So internship doesn't have to be always the perfect, always hit home to what you're going for, but trying out different experiences will be helpful. Now that you're in a role of deputy executive directors, and obviously you have, like you mentioned earlier, have opportunity in internship and continue to cultivate internship opportunity in many city and towns. Can you share a bit about perhaps skill set that you're looking for if you were to take on an intern? What will be some of the skills that students should prepare to have to go into the job search market to secure an internship?
That's a great question. So part of my role here at the MMA as our deputy is I am responsible for a whole bunch of different things, but essentially all of our operations for the organization. So I have a team of 11. I oversee finance, IT, database administration, human resources, special projects, our annual conference. I sort of run the gamut. We're we're the behind the scenes team for all things that happen in terms of operations here at the organization. I also manage an incredible program with Suffolk University. They are our neighbor right over there. And which is a certificate in local government leadership and management. So I both have the opportunity to help with the hiring here of like folks we literally hire here at the MMA, but also working with a lot of folks who are starting their careers in local government and are doing some of our professional development programs with Suffolk University. So that's a long way of saying I feel like I see lots of different kinds of people. You know, I think one thing that always strikes me as I'm interviewing or having conversations with people, and I just went through the hiring process pretty intensely a few months ago for 2 critical new positions that we created on my team, is being prepared, right? Coming into a conversation, being prepared. And even this conversation that I'm having today, I took a few minutes yesterday and I'd already looked at the questions that you sent, but I looked at them again and like made some notes for myself and kind of just gave it a little bit of thought. It is really evident to me when I sit down with someone who has even looked at MMA's website and who hasn't, who has any idea what we do as an organization and who doesn't, right? So I would say one piece of advice I'd have is coming prepared. A woman who we recently hired who's just fantastic. I started in the conversation saying something, oh yeah, we have this monthly publication. She goes, oh, I know, no, I read it every month. I said, oh, you do? She goes, oh yeah, no, I read it. I read this month's issue. And she was, you know, she just, I mean, that's probably more prepared than you need to be, but it showed me that there was like an interest in who we are as an organization. When I read resumes from folks, both for working here and also for applying to our professional development programs, I want to know your why. Like, why do you want to be here? Right? And if your why is like, you just need a job or you just need some, you know, or for the professional programs, well, my boss says I need to do this, like, that's not good enough, right? I want to know that you're prepared. And part of that preparation is your why. So those would be, you know, those would be 2 things I would do. You know, one of the questions in the chat is about expanding your network. This sounds like, you know, I don't mean to state sort of the obvious in terms of advice, but it's just like getting out there and meeting people, taking advantage of opportunities to go to things like this on your lunch hour, and have the opportunity to connect with people and ask questions, because you truly never know where those connections are going to take you.
Yeah, absolutely, right? It's all about networking but doing it right, kind of building that relationship, and being able to raise your hand and volunteer for opportunity. And like Katie said, there's many town hall, there are many open forum, there are many ways you can volunteer in different organization, in local, you know, gatherings or meetings. So those are certainly experiences that will help you to make connections to people in many spaces. They will say, yeah, who are you? You're a great student. Let me talk to you more about potential options and opportunity. And that's how you can find out the way we call it the hidden job market, right? You know, things that you may not necessarily discover on a website that you now be able to learn about because you were at the right place, right time, and talking to the individual that will have those information. So, Katie, one of the things that I always hear from students talk about is it's easy to find the state and federal job because they're on either the USA Job or the city career website. Municipality, sometimes it's a little bit tricky to find, like, what are the hidden opportunity and spaces. Can you elaborate more about, perhaps, I know that you guys have a fabulous, you know, resource hub. And can you share a bit more about how can an individual find opportunity in their city, in their city, town, or local government space?
Well, the MMA's website we have the largest posting of municipal jobs in all of New England on our website. So I'll drop that link into the chat directly to that. But I would, Gerald, as you were just talking a second ago, I want to take a little bit of a step back and talk about sort of why local government, and then I'll answer your question about how to find those opportunities. Local government is changing. And I will tell you, and I'll just be like really explicit, when I walked into, we have an annual conference in January. We have an opportunity for students to come for free to that conference to network and to learn. And so I will figure out after this who the best person there is to kind of gather all that information for BSU students, but we'd love to have you there. But I'll tell you that when I walked into my first one 13 Januaries ago, the room looked very different than it does now. The room is less white, less male, and younger. It is changing. And from my perspective, that's a beautiful thing. The local government officials of 10 and 15 years ago are retiring. And this new crop of people are coming in who have a whole different experience. And so I'd say this is a great time for people in sort of across the whole spectrum to start to try to get into local government, because it is changing. It is becoming more reflective of the people we serve. And I think that's a beautiful thing. So I'll start there. In terms of how to find these opportunities, I'm going to drop I'll drop the link here to the direct link to MMA's website. But I think what you'll see there is sort of pretty traditional jobs that have, X number of years of experience, or certainly you're done with your undergraduate degree, those kinds of things. So there might be something there. But also I would say, again, kind of starting with where you live, reaching out to folks in your own community to find out if there are volunteer opportunities and ways that you can get involved. I think you would find in most cases, people are really receptive to that.
Absolutely. Katie, thank you for sharing that. I always encourage students, like, just check out who are your elected official in your space. Start there, have a conversation, do an informational gathering and coffee chat. Be like, I'd love to learn more about their career experiences. What are the hot topic issues, ways you can get involved. Those are fantastic way that you can also do to get started with that journey, at least to discover, to learn about what's happening in the spaces around you in your own local community. But that's a fantastic way to explore those opportunities.
And I know that can be, and I want to recognize, I'm an ultra extrovert. I'll talk to the wall. And so I want to like start by saying I recognize that there's probably some of you for whom you're saying like, that sounds crazy, that I'm going to figure out who my elected officials are or my appointed officials and try to introduce myself to them for opportunities. So I recognize that can be scary. I think starting with your, career and internship services staff at BSU is a great place to start. And even just like attending things in the community and learning about what's happening can be a good place. But I'll say that for folks who are interested in making a difference in public policy and local government, you'll be welcomed into that space.
Absolutely. And thank you for affirming that, local government can be for anybody. If you're comfortable reaching out.
100%.
If you don't feel comfortable, we are here to support you, reach out. And a good tips I would drop here is stop by your local library. The likelihood that there will be information, poster, event info, upcoming meetings that are happening in your particular district, your particular city and town as well. So check those out. And while there, borrow a book if you want to. I don't know if people read books anymore. Physical book, I do, but while you're there, just to browse around and support the local library space as well. I think again, those are an avenue in which you can find out information and resources as well.
Absolutely.
So we're gonna have one last question for you, and then we'll open up for conversation from the audience in the chat. What advice do you have for students from BSU who are not sure what they want to do, considering local government, but unsure about that? Maybe even going back, what maybe one additional step, training program, resources, material that they should look into as they exploring this particular career pathway?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's mostly what we've talked about. It's taking advantage of opportunities, trying different things, attending things in your own community or in Bridgewater, just kind of going, exposing yourself to different things, reading and learning. Spend some time on the MMA's website. I say that taking no credit because we have an incredible communications team that does all of the content that's there on the website. And so I have no self-serving interest in directing you there, but there's lots of information there and something might spark your interest. We have a young woman, a recent college grad, just 2 years ago, I think, who's on our policy team, who's now managing our entire energy portfolio in terms of advocacy around energy issues as they relate to cities and towns. And she came to that because, she was in school for political science and became interested and an expert in this particular topic. And so I think figuring out what sparks your interest again, by like reading and learning and being prepared for those conversations, doing internships as they become available, all of those things will help you narrow down what feels like the best place for you.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing your advice. I want to have one more follow-up, if it's okay with you. Then we open up for question, Katie. One of the challenge, and this is a continuous topic, either from a career services community talking about government sector, is that the hiring process is pretty long, especially when the federal and the state level, average can be 3 months to over a year, if especially a highly competitive position. Can you share a bit more about the hiring, generally speaking, in City and Snap? Would you say there's a little bit quicker, or not? And in what ways can students kind of be patient, still kind of hold on to that hopes that somebody will get back to them in a reasonable time frame?
Government does not move quickly. It just doesn't. I don't think it moves quickly at any level. Certainly, it's going to move quicker. I would imagine, I have not hired in a city or town, but I would imagine it's going to move quicker there than it is if you're applying for like a job in, the White House, right? Or, even in a member of Congress's office, because it's that bigger, that much more far removed, that many more steps. But I think, yeah, being prepared that government is like not the quickest moving. I will say part of that to, kind of not throw our own municipal members under the bus is in most communities, like the number of people on the Zoom screen right now might be like all of the professional staff in that community, right? Like they are wearing, most town managers and administrators, and certainly in smaller towns, are wearing a dozen hats. They might also be the human resource manager and the procurement officer and the, I don't know, part-time fire chief, like fill in the blank. And so it's a, I would say most local governments are fairly thinly staffed, outside of your large, your Bostons and your really large Eastern Massachusetts communities, they're relatively thinly staffed. And so we see this in lots of different ways that we engage with our communities. Is patience is important.
Got you. Thank you. So we're going to dive right into audience questions. Let me just take a quick look here. One of the students asked about what would you say are the most important first steps for you when you pursued your career?
Most important first step. I think it was just being open, right? To like, just being open to trying different things and being a helper. I was 22 years old when I moved to Washington, D.C., and I was getting my master's degree at night and working during the day at an education nonprofit, and was really broke and, going to happy hours and meeting people and just kind of doing all the things that young people do in DC. And so it was being really open to lots of different opportunities and meeting different kinds of people and, being a helper where I could.
Got it. Thank you. And I would say, if I were to answer that question, I would say, come talk to us. Come by the office, and then we can start to help you to unpack what be something you're interested in, and at least guide you to the direction where you can start to explore those possibilities as well. So kudos. The second questions that comes in is, what are some of your recommendations for sophomore? Like, many opportunity may not, the student perceive that they don't, only for junior and seniors or people who are graduating. If they're a sophomore, what may be some of the things that they can do to prepare themselves for careers in either M&A, or government sectors, or any other adjacent community and organizations?
I think it's probably a question for you more than it is me, because I'm not sure exactly like what opportunities are available, but I think where the question is leading is, you're not at the tail end of your college career yet, right? You're in the first half of your college career. And so I think that is the time to do the learning, to do the preparation, to, just to kind of dive in as much as you can, because you're not at that point yet, right? Where you have to start making decisions about where you're going to go after graduation. You still have lots of time to learn. So, I was a junior when I went to DC, but had already been pretty engaged with the career services and internships office and with the political science department and all of that before that. So it's just about opening up yourself to those opportunities.
Absolutely. I would agree with you. Be open to trying out different things. Volunteer, do a community service project, go to a town hall meetings that we've been talking about. Or even exploring one of those short-term project or trips, or some sort of sharing experiences. That would be a fantastic way for sophomore to explore those possibilities. And like we mentioned earlier, sometimes it's reaching out to your elected official and say, hey, I would love to see if I can do an internship with you for the semester and for this particular time frame, or serving on a campaign. And in that way, you are now instantly open up the different possibility and ways in which different organization works with government sector, right? I think that could be a fantastic way to also explore those options without you fully committed to say, oh, now I need to make a decision to find a full-time experiences in places that you need to start to hone into your interest in the junior and senior year. So I agree with Katie. Be open to those possibilities, and certainly is helpful as well. So let's see any other questions. Not seeing folks, and folks, if you have any additional questions, feel free to post it here. Last questions I have for you now, Katie. Election year. This is an election year. Every 2 years, there's also a different midterm election and then the full presidential election year and so forth. How does that change, if anything, to the impact of the city and state government sector? And how can students get involved?
Yeah, such a good question. I would say it impacts in kind of two ways. There's a kind of practical way, and then there's a sort of ideological policy way. So on the practical level, when there's elections, and certainly if there's a change in administration, both at the federal or the state level, people are going to move around. So we see this every 4 years here in Massachusetts, or maybe every 8 years when there's like a turnover in the governorship. So when Charlie Baker left and Maura Healey came in, there was this huge churn of people, right, who are now looking for different kinds of career opportunities. That opens opportunities up. And so as people move around, certainly we'll see what happens in Washington in November. There will be this movement of people kind of in and out, right? So that's one, I would say, really practical way that elections impact things, is people are moving around jobs. And then ideologically, I think in some ways local government is a little more insulated, but everything trickled down. And so big decisions that are made at the federal level will have impact on state government and will ultimately have impact on local government. Climate change is a really good example. There are major significant, climate change initiatives that have been happening under the Biden administration. The IRA funding, all these just huge pieces of, huge priorities of the Biden administration that will change if Joe Biden is not elected for a second term. And that will trickle down to the state level, right? Because there'll be mandates that will or will not be in place. And that'll trickle down to like emission standards and kind of all of those sorts of things, right? And so it takes time for it to trickle down to the local level, but it happens because everything, those kind of big picture policies, as one example trickles down. So I'd say there's both sort of practical and ideological ways that election years change things. And I would say, just on a third thing, people are paying more attention, right?
Absolutely.
Like as we get closer to November, I mean, if you're a junkie like me, you've been paying attention this whole time. But most people at some point this summer, or certainly after Labor Day, will say, oh, yeah, we got an election, and there's down ballot races that happen on election day as well. And I should start paying attention to what's happening. And so it becomes this heightened time, I think, for government, which for, again, people like me is really exciting. But it means that there'll be all this more attention on what's happening in government, both in Washington and beyond.
Got it. And thank you. And I know we're at time, so I want to take a moment to say, Katie, thank you for so much for taking the time, your busy schedule, to share your advice and wisdom with our students who are in the audience and will be watching this online. We're always proud of all the BSU Bears in many space, and we kudos to you and the exciting work happening in your space and your own organization and the community. But at any point, we'd love to have you back. If you anytime come back to visit campus, we certainly appreciate and happy to welcome to host you in our space as well. But kudos to you. Thank you for you taking the time and having this conversation with us. And student in the room, thank you for joining us today. And we wish you the best, and check out some of our upcoming event on Handshake and continue to reach out to us for any questions. Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Take care.